you're looking at Professor Gregory Dorr of the Kirby Institute, which is a publicly funded medical research body attached to New South Wales University. Here we see Professor Gregory Dorr standing next to this man with the glasses on the left. He's called Stuart Loveday, and he came from the UK in the early 90s to found what is now called Hepatitis Australia and Hepatitis New South Wales. And no one did more to stop infected blood victims in Australia, people who acquired Hepatitis C, from blood transfusions or blood treatments, like with haemophiliacs. 1,750 haemophiliacs were infected with Hepatitis C. And unlike Canada, UK or other countries, haemophiliacs in Australia and infected blood victims were denied financial assistance. And it was due to direct lobbying by the Australian government and its taxpayer-funded public bodies such as Hepatitis Australia, Hepatitis New South Wales, and this Kirby Institute, which Professor Greg Dorr works for, have hosted Hepatitis C evenings, World Hepatitis Day 2017. They had a ABC journalist, the ABC's chief medical reporter, Sophie Scott, was the presenter, even though she refuses, and her ABC refuse to investigate the contaminated blood scandal. She was there presenting an evening about what a success story with the Kirby Institute that this man, Stuart Loveday, and their program of the Hepatitis C treatments has been in Australia. Now, it's absolutely outrageous. I've got major integrity issues to ask about this Kirby Institute, which Professor Dorr works for. And in fact, also, I've made it clear to the Infected Blood Inquiry in the UK, which I've been a witness of, that this man, Stuart Loveday, was part of the Australian government's, he was central to the Australian government's denial of haemophiliacs getting financial assistance, and that led, people from our group, having their deaths hastened. It truly is terrible. Now let me show you a couple other pictures here I want to show you. Okay, you're now looking at a graphic featuring the ABC's award-winning medical reporter, Sophie Scott, right? So the ABC is Australia, of course, Australia's publicly funded broadcaster. And that means something here, because how do we inform Australia that we've had something like a contaminated blood scandal with tens of thousands of people infected and affected by HIV and Hepatitis C contaminated blood transfusions and blood products? How do we do that? The commercial networks aren't interested in this story, and people believe that's largely because their advertisers don't want this sort of subject matter, on commercial TV. But we pay taxes, right? So if Channel 9 don't want to investigate, if Channel 7 and Channel 10, they'd rather play American Idol or whatever, right? So where do we go? We go to the ABC, right? So remember something. There's people with the bleeding disorder haemophilia, in our group who've currently got liver cancer right now. And that's because they acquired Hepatitis C from their blood treatments, which they were told were purified, and they were told they were purified, believe it or not, here's the irony, by her boss. The chair of the ABC, Ida Buttrose, in the 1980s, told haemophiliacs that their treatments were purified. How outrageous. And 1,750 of them ended up getting Hep C, and there's no financial assistance. There's no help. There's financial assistance in Canada, in the UK, in Ireland, all around the world for haemophiliacs and infected blood victims, except for one country. So this Good Samaritan, a follower of our group, wrote to Sophie Scott, of course, the ABC medical reporter, to inquire as to why, there's never been any investigation by the ABC into Australia's infected blood scandal. Why won't you investigate and report on the contaminated blood scandal here in Australia? You are a journalist. Isn't this your job? Additionally, you are a medical reporter. Shouldn't you have been investigating such a medical issue which had such severe ramifications for the victims in order for them to receive help? Again, I thought you were a journalist. Isn't this your job? You are a journalist paid by the taxpayers, and as a taxpayer, I demand you respond to the request for an investigation. Otherwise, Sophie, the blood of thousands of those whom have died is essentially on your hands. You could have helped these people and their families. You could have helped to save many lives. As a citizen of Australia, I want answers. As a taxpayer of Australia, I want answers. I hope you can deliver them. Okay, now that was an impassioned plea, if ever there was one, and boy, do I thank that wonderful lady, and I have thanked her. Okay, so this is Sophie Scott, who the Australian taxpayer pays hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and has done for decades. She's a multi-millionaire. Her husband's very well remunerated as well. Lots of money there, right? If you and your associates continue to harass me via email, now this person has only written one email, okay? If you and your associates continue, she's not an associate of ours. We'd never heard of her before she sent this email. The first time we heard of her was after she sent this exchange with Sophie Scott. Fact. If you and your associates continue to harass me via email and social media, I'll be contacting the authorities and ask them to investigate your conduct. I'm not an investigative journalist at the moment. This story has been covered widely in the Australian media already. Please stop this harassment or I will take action. Let's zone in on this. This story has been covered widely in the Australian media already. Now, this person here is paid by the Australian taxpayer, and she's saying it's been covered widely. Okay, are you listening to this? If you're watching this video, have you seen the infected blood scandal covered on Four Corners or on 60 Minutes or 7:30 Report or anywhere else? Have you seen it? Why not? It's been covered widely. And if Sophie Scott's correct that Australia's deadliest medical scandal has been covered widely, why is it that haemophiliacs are still dying without help? Why is it that there are women who are infected with the deadly virus hepatitis C from blood given during childbirth who've lost everything? They've lost their health, their marriages, the lot, and now they're living in poverty with liver cirrhosis and cancer. Why have they not been helped, Sophie Scott, if this has been widely reported in the Australian media already? Now, the Good Samaritan who wrote to Sophie Scott asking her why there hasn't been an investigation replies, your ABC News profile says you are the national medical reporter for the ABC. This isn't harassment. I'm simply requesting an inquiry. I've never heard public reporting on this issue either. Not on mainstream media anyway. And the only resource available on a Contaminated Blood Australia Google search is for the infectedbloodaustralia.com website, which I'd never heard about from mainstream sources either. I'm just asking for any answers, Sophie, so I don't appreciate your threats. Look at this from the Kirby Institute. This was a World Hepatitis event held in 2017, so some years before that email exchange between the ABC medical reporter Sophie Scott and a concerned member of the public asking why Australia's deadliest medical scandal, HIV and hepatitis C contaminated blood, had never been investigated. Now, let me just read this, okay? Hepatitis C, a cure for all. On Thursday, 27 July, the Kirby Institute held a special World Hepatitis Day event, which brought together key stakeholders and community members in New South Wales. It didn't ask any tainted blood victims, but anyway, to celebrate Australia's significant achievements in hepatitis C treatment. Okay, so this is to celebrate Australia's significant achievements in hepatitis C treatment. Okay, really? Okay, and who was here? Let's have a look. Ms. Sophie Scott ABC led the panel, which included, have a look at this, Dr. Kerry Chant. Remember her? She's famous, isn't she? Told us not to talk to our neighbours during the COVID pandemic. Don't talk to your neighbours! And it made international headlines. That's the New South Wales Chief Health Officer, Dr. Kerry Chant. And next to her here we have New South Wales. We've got Professor Greg Dorr of the Kirby Institute, right? Then we have next to him Mr. Stuart Loveday, who I said before, he's from Hepatitis New South Wales. No one did more to stop haemophiliacs being denied financial assistance. Now, you've got to remember, this is so serious because recently, over in the UK, a former British Health Minister called Andy Burnham called what happened to haemophiliacs corporate manslaughter and said it was a criminal cover-up. And this man, Stuart Loveday, was the government's man, the government-funded man who stopped haemophiliacs getting financial assistance. So that's a criminal situation, I'd have to say. And here's his mate, this fellow Dorr, okay? Now, okay, so it says, thank you to Sophie Scott and all of the wonderful panellists for speaking to our event. We want to thank the guests who made the event a huge success. Please enjoy the photos from the event below. Okay, so here we go, right? There's Sophie Scott. She hosted the event. This is the same person that scolds members of the public and threatens them. Okay, this lady who wrote to her just a year or so ago is threatened by Sophie Scott, who's on taxpayer money, for asking why it is that they've never investigated. And on this panel, there you have Professor Greg Dorr of the Kirby Institute, right? And here you have his friend, Stuart Loveday, the founder of Hepatitis Australia and Hepatitis New South Wales. Aren't they looking so happy? What a great success. If it's Hepatitis C treatment's been such a great success in Australia, why is it that, as I mentioned, haemophiliacs are now not getting the help they need who've got liver cirrhosis and liver cancer? And what about women in childbirth who are infected with Hep C? They've lost everything, their families, they live in poverty. How is that a success? They're still very ill. Okay, these people are chronically ill and disabled, right? So here are these pictures from this wonderful event, okay, the usual stuff, the usual look of these things. There's another shot of the panel, okay? There's Sophie, the panellist. How outrageous. There's Stuart Loveday. Look at that man. What a terrible man. You know, he's killed people with his discrimination. The discrimination of Hepatitis New South Wales and Hepatitis Australia against haemophiliacs was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Okay? I mean it. I'm prepared to go to court. And I've actually gone to the UK and I've been a witness in their largest legal investigation where I've mentioned, if you can actually go and look up Charles Mackenzie statement to the Infected Blood Inquiry on Google, and you'll see what I went into great evidence about what this man did to haemophiliacs and the campaign for justice for Australians. Okay, and there's Sophie again looking happy with the panelists as they discuss the great success. Okay, all on government money, of course. Look at them. Look at that. There he is looking serious. Not a very serious haircut, is it? This man's made millions. You know he made millions. He campaigned directly against us getting any help. We got no funding from the government. We forced a couple of inquiries off my pension, hey? And, you know, a Senate inquiry I forced. No help whatsoever. And yet this man had millions and millions of dollars to say that helping haemophiliacs was discrimination against drug users. People who acquired viruses from sharing needles and other means other than blood transfusion. That's what he did. Okay? So, this is the caliber of the Kirby Institute's 2017 World Hepatitis Day. There's Greg again, Professor Dorr. Oh, there he is next to Kerry Chant, looking resplendent as per usual. Okay, so here we are, and there's Stuart now. There he is, chatting away, millions and millions of taxpayer money, huge salary, huge superannuation, haemophiliacs dying without help and have died without help. Although she looks a bit circumspect, I think she can read through that man. He's a major imposter, okay? He's a fraud. And there is, and she's happy as well. And what will I say about her? Well, I won't say she's a fraud, but I will say this. She's no medical reporter. She missed the biggest story, the biggest medical story in Australia, and it's cost lives, okay? Because Australia didn't know about its contaminated blood scandal, so it believes the ABC, it believes that when World Hepatitis Day and the Kirby Institute and other taxpayer-funded bodies say the whole thing has been a great success, okay? It's been a great celebration. Thank you to Sophie Scott and all the wonderful panelists for speaking to our event. We also want to thank the guests who made the event a huge success. It's all been such a great success, eh? Now let's go and have a look at what Stuart Loveday, this friend of Professor Dorr, told the Senate inquiry that I forced in 2004 to try and get financial assistance for haemophiliacs, try and get compensation for infected blood victims. Let's have a look at the evidence that he gave. So let's go and have a look at the evidence of Stuart Loveday. This is the Australian government's man for all things hepatitis C. Okay, so we're now looking at some of the evidence that Stuart Loveday gave to this Senate inquiry in 2004 into hepatitis C and the Australian blood supply. And I've compiled it in a report here called The Alliance of Bias, but this is actually his quote. So the first thing they said in their submission was, okay, and this is made on the 30th of January 2004, we have not specifically addressed the terms of reference as we do not have the expertise or capacity to do so. So why were they submitting then? If they don't have the capacity, okay, and they haven't addressed the terms of reference, they've breached the rules. We address the terms of reference, and yet here he is, he gets to make a submission, right? And yet, have a look at this evidence here for you. June 12, 2002, Stuart Loveday came to a meeting. He gate-crashed a meeting that we had at the Ashfield Uniting Church, okay? A meeting of Hep C victims from tainted blood and HIV patients from tainted blood. He said, we fully respect... He was asked by the Reverend Bill Cruz if he would interfere with us if we tried to lobby for ourselves and get an inquiry, right? And he said, we fully respect the right of this group to do that, but because of the negligent nature, or the alleged negligent nature, which may or may not be the case, it probably is the case, I don't know, because it's such a complex issue, we see it as something we can't judge on. We would support the individuals within it, we would support the groups within it, as we have done already. No, they haven't. But we would see this as being a legal issue. Okay, so that's what he said on June 12, 2002. Now we fast forward to his actual evidence, okay, in this report I've compiled. And we go down to here where he says, in terms of ex gratia payments, these were the financial assistance that was made available to victims of infected blood all around the world. And in the UK, a year before he made this statement, it was made available, okay, to haemophiliacs and infected blood victims. So he says, and it's actually quite significant. It's been close, I think, $1 million in the last 20 years, tax-free for British victims under certain conditions. So it says, in terms of ex gratia payments, as have happened in some countries, this is Stuart Loveday talking, in terms of ex gratia payments, as have happened in some countries abroad where the situation may be different from the Australian context, we would also be very concerned about the perceived inequality if payments were made to some, but not to other people with hepatitis C. We do not support the view that a particular group of people with hepatitis C should receive ex gratia payments. If this were to happen, we ask the question what message this would send to those people from countries overseas who had acquired hepatitis C through blood transfusions or other medical means in their countries of origin. Egypt, Southeast Asian countries, Europe, who are now Australians. Let me read that again. This is the government's taxpayer, this is the Australian government, okay? They gave our taxpayer dollars to this man, Stuart Loveday, who founded this Hepatitis Australia, the Hepatitis New South Wales, the peak bodies for Hep C, okay? And they're basically duty bound to represent the best interests of all people infected with this deadly virus, right? And he says, all Australians, and he says those many people from countries overseas who acquired Hep C, okay, from blood transfusions in places like Egypt, why can't they sue or take action in those countries? Why does that, because they were infected with infected blood in Asia or Egypt or Europe, why does that mean our haemophiliacs can't be helped? Why can't they take issue in their own countries? Why does that mean that it's unfair on Australians being helped? And now he's got healthcare and other workers who acquired HCV through needle stick injuries where the legal judgment against them has not been in their favour. Are they not insured? How many of these people are we talking about with a legal judgment that's not been in their favour? We're talking about a country of 25 plus million. How many? 1 or 2 people? And he wanted to see thousands of families denied financial assistance, those families affected by contaminated blood, because it would be unfair on healthcare workers who'd be insured anyway. 1 or 2 people, they might be in that category, and it's terrible if they have been infected through a needle stick injury. But my goodness, to deny infected blood victims help on the basis of some nurses that had an insurance problem, my God. Now he's got children who acquired HCV, hepatitis C, from their HCV mothers. Well, no, that's not unfair on them. They should be helped too, Stuart Loveday. How outrageous. People who acquired HCV infections through unsterile tattooing, they should sue the tattoo parlour. Okay? Other people who acquired HCV through a range of means, people who acquired HCV through blood contact, through sharing injecting equipment, when there was no knowledge that non-A, non-B or Hep C could be transmitted that way. That's not true. That's a bloody lie, Stuart Loveday. People in the 1980s were well aware from 85 of HIV, and then to say that people had no idea that injecting needles might give them Hep C is just completely disingenuous, and it's an outrage that you brought that up. We question why, this is what he says, we question why these other people with Hep C also not given some sort of recompense for their hardship and reduced quality of life now endured. We also ask what impact any payments would have on the availability of public funding for general hepatitis C service improvement. Let's decode that. His own salaries, his own budgets. Yeah, the Hep C service improvement. What is Hep C service improvement? Oh, I see. It's the Hepatitis Australia with its brochures and its millions of dollars in salaries. That's the Hepatitis C improvement. We believe that support management treatment services for people with hepatitis C should be improved, but these need to apply to all people with Hep C. We do not support particular benefits accruing to particular groups. If ex gratia payments are made to a few who can prove their infection was at a particular time via a particular means, what message does that send to the many hundreds of thousands of Australians who do not fit those particular criteria? We do not consider that to be an equitable situation. I'll tell you what the message it does to you, corrupt man. The message it sends to them is that they have acquired a virus through other means outside of being knowingly given a contaminated blood treatment by a pharmaceutical company and the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood and the Australian government. If there's people culpable with their infections, they should have help. Okay, and if there's not, it's a tragedy and they still deserve help. But for you to lobby against infected blood victims with these appalling reasons, while with the taxpayer paying you to do so, is a bloody crime. It really is. Okay, and the evidence goes on, okay, and you can find this on infectedbloodaustralia.com. The amount of garbage this went into, right? Have a look at this. This is his, he made an additional submission after he found out that the inquiry was going to deny assistance. He got all cocky. He found out that his lobbying, okay, remember originally when he made a submission, he said they cannot address the terms of reference. Okay, remember that? But now he's all cocky, makes an additional submission, okay? This goes from he couldn't address the terms of reference, but now he makes an additional submission, okay, by May. That's because he'd found out that the Senate inquiry had been nobbled and they weren't going to give financial assistance. Okay, so here he is writing about me. In verbal evidence on the 6th of April, Mr. Charles McKenzie, administrator of the Tainted Blood Products Action Group, TPBAG, that's what Infected Blood Australia used to be called. We've had various different names over the years. Implied when describing the role of the Hepatitis C councils across Australia that the Hepatitis C councils are community groups where people got it, Hep C, through sharing needles. The implication that Hep C councils are in existence solely for and on behalf of people who acquired Hep C through illicit drug using means is incorrect. All Hepatitis C councils in Australia, including the Hep C Council of New South Wales, have always provided information, support, referral and advocacy services for all people with Hep C, whatever the route of transmission. How is that really true? You've just read what he had to say about how unfair it is if you helped haemophiliacs. Does that really sound true that he would help them and lobby for them? This can be evidence from our published reports, media resources, websites, what lies. Number 2, this is Loveday talking again about me to the Senate. We reject the assertion made by Mr. McKenzie that the reason for the Hep C Council differs from the position taken by him, TPBAG, with regard to recompense for people with blood transfusion-acquired Hep C is because we are primarily funded by the New South Wales government. The Council is a fully independent, community-based, non-government organisation with a membership at 31st of May 2004 of 942 individuals and organisations, and with a management committee responsible for overall policy and direction elected from that membership. Many of our members are people who acquired Hep C from blood transfusion or blood products. That's a lie. They were not members who acquired blood transfusion or blood products in Australia. They may be from Egypt, where he said earlier, but not from Australia. And many members are people who acquired Hep C through other means, including injecting drug use. We are funded by the New South Wales Health Department to perform a range of services, but this in no way impinges on our independence. Right. So he says we reject the assertion by Mr. McKenzie that we are funded primarily by New South Wales government, but at the end he says we are funded by the. So where do they get their money from? Where did they get their millions and millions of dollars? They got about a couple of grand each year in donations. So where did that money come? It came from the taxpayer. So he rejects the assertion that I made that they're primarily funded by the New South Wales government. And I never made an assertion that they only represent people who got it for injected drug use. I made the assertion that they didn't do what they were funded to do, and that was represent the interests of all people with Hep C. Haemophilia should not have been lobbied against by this man and his group. It's criminal. People died because of this, and he was taxpayer funded to do it. Okay? And the guy goes on and on and on. It was outrageous. I can read some other points. Here we go. Let's see. This is just so upsetting for me to be able to have to read this out to you. It really is, because it's so egregious, the discrimination. Number 7, we repeat our assertion made in our verbal evidence on 6th of April. Remember, this is from a guy who said that they couldn't address the terms of reference. We repeat our assertion made in our verbal evidence on 6th of April that in the case of people with haemophilia, were the current inquiry to find that people involved in the decision not to use surrogate testing in the 1980s were at fault, then we would support the view that the group of people who should have their situation viewed differently and their financial recompense be provided. How interesting. He writes this now after he knows that the inquiry is going to deny assistance. So he wants to repeat. We repeat our assertion made in verbal evidence on 6th of April that in the case of people with haemophilia, were the current inquiry to find that people involved in the decision not to surrogate test in the 1980s were at fault, then he knew that they were going to say that no one was at fault. You see, he knew it, and he did. He destroyed that inquiry, and he's killed people. Okay? That's what these people did. This is the friend of the Kirby Institute, and this is the friend that was celebrated by Professor Greg Dorr. So here we are at the University of New South Wales, and they have a write-up here about Professor Gregory Dorr. Now, the Kirby Institute is affiliated with New South Wales Uni, and it has a bio here. And Professor Dorr, of course, is head of viral clinical research, but also talks about how he holds large-scale ongoing public sector research funding from the US National Institutes for Health and the Australian National Health and Medical Research Council. Now, that's important, really important, because the National Health and Medical Research Council have got themselves in major criminal trouble, okay, because it was their decision not to do a recall on the deadly virus hepatitis C that led to haemophiliacs not being told that every single one of them who'd used blood products in Australia had been infected with the virus. Okay, so they're in big trouble, this group, and they're his principal backers. And it says here, Professor Dorr has been the president of the Australasian Society for HIV, Viral Hepatitis and Sexual Health Medicine. Okay, he's a member of the NHRMMC Council. What did I just say? They're key to the cover-up. This man's key to the cover-up. So is that organisation. Professor Dorr established the St Vincent's Hospital Viral Hepatitis Service in 1999 and has led its development into one of the leading national and international hepatitis C treatment services. I question that. With a particular focus on marginalised populations, including people who inject drugs and homeless persons. So you notice that Hep C New South Wales and Hep C Australia were very geared to the injected drug use and homeless side, or people that, I shouldn't say homeless side, but I mean people that might have actually had needle stick injuries or, as I say, shared needles, etc., or unsterile tattooing. They could have got Hep C, and they were very focused on that. And they never, you notice how when they lobbied, when that guy Stuart Loveday, the friend of Greg Dorr, when he lobbied against haemophiliacs and infected blood victims being given the kind of financial assistance they routinely afforded overseas, he made no mention of their suffering. He made no mention of how difficult it was to have haemophilia or to be a woman who got Hep C from blood given during childbirth and have to raise a family on top. And there was no mention of that. The whole focus was on it would be unfair on others. Is this what Greg Dorr and his Kirby Institute believe is a success for Australia? You know, this man and his institute, they've accepted funding from CSL, who are the actual culprits responsible for the manslaughter of haemophiliacs. They've received funding. And in fact, they've had funding from the Australian Red Cross. And when we've tried, and journalists have tried, including Joanne McCarthy, who was the journalist that basically forced the Royal Commission into child sex abuse, okay? The failure of institutions to respond to child sex abuse. She basically was wanting to know, when she was covering the story before her retirement, how many people in Australia were infected with the virus hepatitis C as a result of blood transfusion. And when she asked the government and she asked the Australian Red Cross, they told her that the Kirby Institute are responsible for that. Well, when we went to them, they basically wouldn't give us the numbers that we asked for. So they're the ones who are responsible for it, and they won't tell us. And yet this man and his Kirby Institute had a World Hepatitis Day on 2017 with such a success story, the hepatitis C treatments. Really? Why don't we know how many people were infected with hepatitis C from blood transfusion or blood products? Why don't we know how many Australians were killed by hepatitis C from blood products or blood treatments, hey? And now to today's Sydney Morning Herald on this July 21, where Professor Greg Dorr of the Kirby Institute is actually quoted in this article, "Vaccination driving down long COVID risk, but numbers still high." I just want to take you to something Professor Greg Dorr says here. Okay, well, it's the people who haven't been infected yet and are not up to date with vaccination that are the greatest concern, said the infectious disease physician who treats patients at St Vincent's Long COVID Outpatient Clinic in Darlinghurst. It's the people who haven't been infected yet and are not up to date with vaccination that are the greatest concern. Really? Is that really the greatest concern? Really, for COVID? I'll tell you what I think the concern is. I think the concern is integrity, and and here they are on that World Hepatitis Day in 2017, the Kirby Institute. Okay, that day where they celebrated Australia's great success with Hep C. There he is, Professor Greg Dorr. Okay, I'm circumspect about this Kirby Institute, where they get their funding from. Even Bill Gates' foundation has poured millions into them. Okay, CSL, who are guilty of manslaughter. The Australian Red Cross Lifeblood. There's Dr. Kerry Chant, Chief Health Officer, New South Wales. There we are, Sophie Scott, who said that the issue of contaminated blood has been widely reported. Okay? And there she is presenting the World Hepatitis Day because contaminated blood's been widely reported. That's why no one's been helped and people have died without help. Okay? And there we have the main man himself, the guy that lobbied against haemophiliacs directly and stopped infected blood victims from getting any financial assistance, the like of which is available routinely in Canada and the United Kingdom, which led to people dying. Okay? A really terrible thing. And it's all part of Australia's public health system. You know, these organisations, these NGOs, these Professor Greg Dorrs, the Kerry Chants, the medical reporters, the whole bloody thing. And this has been Charles Mackenzie. I thank you if you've listened to the whole thing. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, my health is failing. I've still got hepatitis C, and I've given my whole life to this. I gave all my pension and all my money to this fight, and we were defeated by Australia's infectious disease cartel, the Stuart Lovedays, the ABC and its medical reporters who helped cover things up. Terrible for a public broadcaster to do that. And the Kirby Institute and Professor Greg Dorr. That's why we never got any help for the Australian victims of the infected blood scandal. Please support a Royal Commission. You can do so by clicking the link in the bio or clicking the link associated with this video. Thank you so much for having listened.